Good to go.
Welcome back. Thank you very much it's been an incredible day. I think I can safely say that we've learned a ton of valuable content today, all very useful. Hopefully a lot of people are excited about what they can take back to their shops, what they can do right now on a shoestring, on a really extended budget. All the options are available. All the success is right here at your fingertips. All because of the fantastic organizers of this conference. So thank you very much to them. This session is very creatively titled Metrics, Budgets, and ROI, Oh My. So essentially what we decided was, what we were gonna do is role play a little bit of a typical interaction thank you very much for when you try to pitch any of your engagement ideas to your leadership, or up the chain a little bit on really great ideas that you have, etc. So we were very, very lucky to access one of these types of people.
See, Kelly knows. Kelly knows the truth.
And I will let Ben Chapdelaine introduce himself and kind of how he sees himself here and what his role is.
So please don't send that to, I think you're going to send this to. So my name is Ben Chapdelaine. I'm the Associate Director of Annual Giving here at McMaster. I am not privileged enough to make big decisions at the university. Hence, this will truly be me acting out something that is not reality. So 2 disclaimers: I'm not a VP or a director, and 2, I'm not as evil as I may seem in 10 minutes. But hopefully I can sort of bring a different angle to whatever ideas you come up with, and why is it that some of those things sometimes get shut down, or in other words, in our office, I'm often the, I like to call it the realist. Some people call me the party pooper. Okay, so it's just bringing a little bit of reality to those grand ideas.
And if I can offer my own disclaimer, some of the scenarios may not fit with how I actually am. So keep in mind that I am acting. It is an act, okay? So hopefully we'll lead you through some of the kind of suggestions on kind of establishing your metrics, accessing budget, and really determining what your return on investment of any of your programming will be, and pitching that to your leadership. So if we can get started. Before I get started, I just want to mention that I graduated high school and went to university around the same time Ben went to university. My high school girlfriend and I broke up before we went to university, which was very sad. We were very much in love, but we kept in touch. And so the first couple of years that she was at McMaster, she kept talking to me about this other Ben and how dreamy he was, and oh my goodness, he's amazing. So I've actually had quite a lot of years to foster kind of a anger that may come out in some of my acting. So just to give you a bit of a backstory, we have history. So let's get started.
I don't even know who he's referencing, for the record, but that's okay.
So we will absolutely kind of explain a little bit on how to get started, how to allocate your resources, and how to ensure sustainability for your programming. Sound good? Okay, so getting started. Here's the first scenario. Thank you, Ben, for spending 4 hours while I get you up to speed with a complete picture of the millennial generation, what we think their wants and needs are, and how the university needs to completely change the way we interact with our entire alumni population. I've personally read, well, really skimmed, over 200 articles online about this generation and what's most important to them. They are worried about their future, they're not motivated, and they have very high expectations. So, this is very different from any generation that's come before them. I'm demanding that you give me 2.5 staff to continue to figure out this group, maybe plan a few events to alleviate their worries over the next 3 years.
Okay, what's your name again? I don't know what planet you live on, but in our reality, we just came back from a budget meeting where we've been asked by the senior administration of this university to cut out 4% of our personnel dollars. Now that means you and, okay, potentially you and some of your colleagues may lose their jobs over the next 6 weeks. The reality of asking for 2.5 people, 100 grand just doesn't happen. And in fact, you can be the first one. We just cut out 4 hours of wasting.
Okay, so the wrong way to approach accessing budget. Some of the red flags in there, I don't know if anybody wants to, but definitely, I mean, kind of assuming that we know the best path forward for our young alumni population, not really that great. Relying on articles for all of our data, also not really great. Demanding anything from your boss, really not great. And then planning to take all of that and try and deliver a few events, really not ideal.
More importantly is forgetting that whatever idea you have, however great it might be, doesn't necessarily fit into the big picture that your senior management might have in the near future. So creating a case over time is what is sometimes forgotten. Their reality on that day, when you come in with that great idea, might be very, very different than what you understand as your reality and what you think as a group, as a whole, we should be doing moving forward. So just keep that in mind. Anything to anyone in a senior role, just try to move from.
Sounds good? Anybody have any other questions on that? So now we'll move on to maybe the right way to approach a situation like this. So, hello, Mr. Chapdelaine. I'm Ben Seewald. I work in the alumni office on students and young alumni programming. Thank you so much for 10 minutes of your time as a highlights of our young alumni population, which is 0 to 10 years after graduation. Recent academic research and industry best practice tells us that this generation, defined as those born from 1980 to 2000, is set to inherit, along with Gen Z, $1 trillion in the next 50 years. It's my belief that for the first, make some minor changes to our existing programming to speak directly to our new grads, see their giving patterns and overall connection to our school. This will help cultivate future leaders, volunteers, and donors' success.
That sounds pretty good. Did you say $1 trillion? Okay, you now have 8 minutes. Go.
So again, I think you could identify some of the language that I used there, and just catch the leadership's interest on things that are going to have them sit up and take notice, keeping their work again as priority, and telling the storyline that's interesting to them, not you. So similar as we don't know what's happening in the alumni population, we wouldn't go and tell somebody else, listen, this is what the market says is really important to you. The university administration has a lot of priorities, is juggling a lot of things. If we can figure out what some of those things are and hitch our wagon to those things, it's going to make a big difference.
For sure, buzzwords or certain, strategies and key components of where you know your senior administration wants to go with the university. Take whatever it is that you have, is great. Asking their parents to borrow the car for a weekend at the cottage with friends. Somehow it was a better deal for your folks to lend you the car, knowing that you would be the one driving, and because there's rules about not drinking that you already know, and you spun that to make them feel better about you driving instead of how your friend driving.
You fill it up with gas.
Right? Somehow we found a way, because you knew what the important parts were about what your folks thought of important when it came to your going back and forth to any place. So, although it's harder to get to know your senior administration the same way, try to find those trigger points that will make sense to them.
The other thing that I would really recommend is be flexible. So budget just might not be a reality. And so try and be creative, be flexible with whatever you can get, and really be grateful for that as well. Sound good?
Any questions?
Awesome.
Oh, hang on. Yes.
Whoa.
No, I was just going to say one of the comments that I think also is valid is finding the gaps in what you're already doing and not necessarily trying to create something new on top of what exists, but try to fill the gaps that you already see in the organization. And I think your senior admin will recognize that you're thinking strategically about where those gaps are rather than just wanting to create a whole new program.
One thing that I sometimes think about when resources are limited is, and that's great, that new idea you just come up with is amazing. What are you willing to give up in what we're currently doing to replace this one? And it's like, oh, well, I didn't think we would have to cut anything up. Well, unless you're creating more time in a day, or you're, growing 2 more arms to get it done, how are you going to get it all finished up in time and in a reasonable manner?
Okay, so allocation of resources. Hey, Chappie! People call me Chappie? Listen, I just read a BuzzFeed article on millennials, and I think we need to create this entire new campaign for our youngins. Oh man, BuzzFeed is where all the greatest information is. Like the new grads, that's where it's at. Okay, so maybe like 2 years out, like maybe 5. I mean, I guess we could probably plan up to 10, but like whatever. That's the beauty of this, is that people can kind of self-select. People kind of, it's really adaptable. They go with the flow, right? So it's really like, if we build it, they will come.
I don't even know what you just said.
So what are you asking for? What do you want?
Right, budget, man, budget. That's the word. I need the dollars. Probably like $250,000 will do it. Maybe like an expense account too while we're at it. Because I'm going to need to take a bunch of my friends, the new alumni, out for drinks and like talk about like what I think they need, that kind of thing. Just, you got to trust me on this, man. Come on.
That sounds great. But perhaps if you just didn't show up tomorrow, we'd all be better off.
Woohoo! 3-day weekend.
That's a little extreme, I think. Somehow that won't work.
Somehow that's not really the best path forward, I don't think. But without going through the painful exercise of identifying all the wrong things there, it does bring up some interesting points. So when you are asking for resources to be allocated to your program, make sure you present the information in a way that's going to land with your leadership. So for this example, it's extreme, but in a real life example, we created a really long PowerPoint with lots of slides and everything else that clearly explained the needs, talked a lot about, there was a number of analogies, some great quotes. And our vice principal or vice president of advancement is really a stats guy. He's a visual guy. Like basically we condensed 12 slides into one graph, and that was perfect. So if you know what your leadership, kind of how they consume information, you'll be able to make a much stronger pitch.
Huge. I mean, if you know, they always say that, if you know your audience, you know how to communicate with them best. If somebody brings me a 5-page document with just words, the project is out. Doesn't matter how great it is, I'm not reading it. Mostly because I have a hard time reading. But secondly, I'm a visual guy. Show me how this makes sense visually and how I can actually jump on board with this. So understanding who you're talking to and what will trigger them best is critical.
The analogy that we actually used was when Neanderthal evolved into Homo erectus, it was really about the landscape. So the landscape changed, right? And so Neanderthal was actually stronger and better looking and had a better community and everything else, but they weren't designed for the new geography and chasing antelope across the plains. Don't ever use that analogy, ever. Not a good one. Any questions on what not to do while asking for resources?
I think we got it.
Okay. So this might be a better approach. Hello, Mr. Chapdelaine. I'm Ben Seewald. I work in the advancement shop. Thanks for the chance to brief you about a really exciting new proposal I've been developing. I have 3 options for you to consider. One is very simple, requiring very few resources, and then the other two have substantially more investment of both staff time and financial commitment.
So what are you asking for?
So,
Because we don't have a lot of budget right now, but if you'd like, we can probably carve out a little bit of staff time. What do you need?
well, that's phenomenal. That would be terrific. In order to do kind of our resource light proposal, I can pull together a campus working group on campus, develop an engagement survey to figure out what our young alumni demographic might actually find useful from our university. This won't cost hard dollars. All I would really ask from you and your office is some strategic influence with your decision maker network to provide input on the overall engagement plan.
We can probably do that, and we got a couple of students that I think you can use for that.
Outstanding. Ta-da!
It's just like that. It's
If you do that.
It's so easy. It's just so easy. So it's really important to discuss reality, is basically the takeaway from this slide. What you can do on a shoestring, making the case for sustainable funding and attention, and really making your boss look good for saying yes and supporting one of your really great ideas.
And if you're not sure if this has been done before, just call it a pilot. Everybody is willing to support a pilot because there's a potential end in sight. All right, it didn't work, it was a pilot, we move on. If it worked, it was already sort of carved out, at least in pieces, either financially or through people's time, and then it can just expand if it has been successful. But just use the pilot approach, it works all the time.
Also, leveraging students is a phenomenal idea. Everybody's looking for more experience. Everybody's looking for quote unquote free labor. Students are tremendously capable, way more capable than I was when I was a student, that's for sure. And they can actually move your programs really far, really fast because staff listen to students more than they'll listen to their fellow staffs. Staffs.
Good word.
Yeah.
Good word.
Hashtag.
Just go with it. Just go with it. Keep going.
The other thing is you can access, there's a ton of free resources that you can access immediately right now. The Millennial Impact Report, if anybody doesn't know about that, check it out. Just this morning, they sent out their top 100 tips on millennials, who's hilarious and ironic. Academic impressions, both their conferences and webinars. Conferences like this, CCAE, Case ASAP, really this phenomenal network. Also, you can look outside of the industry for backup data. Goldman Sachs has some phenomenal financial research done on millennials. PewResearch.org, Alumni Futures, like there's no end to information that can make you look really good and prepared when you go and pitch your ideas. Any questions or comments on that? Staffs.
Oh, there's a question.
How do you get them to listen to the other two options?
That may not be in the reality. That's when you just kind of have to swallow it and say, foot in the door, and maybe we can talk about adding on other components that are built from the other two options as we go along, as success happens.
And the reality is you'll know based on who you're working with, who the individuals are, whether or not providing 3 options is the best way to present your case, or if it's coming up with something very simple that they can buy into right away. I mean, you'll know that just based on who they are.
And some people always like to choose the middle option. So if you give them 3 options, they won't choose the most expensive one, but they also won't choose the cheapest one either. So yeah, if you know your market, that's probably best. All right, we ready for the ROI? Okay, so this is about adding sustainability to your programming, right? Okay, don't worry about a thing, Big Ben. I've got this handled. I'm an expert. I have a cousin who's a millennial. I am ready to implement our entire Young Alumni Engagement Strategy on my own. Events, social campaigns, Marcom, collateral, you name it, I got it. I have to move all of my other responsibilities off my plate over the next few years so that I can work on this, but we'll learn as we go. I can get 500 followers on Twitter like that, 100 people to like a page on Facebook, and I'm also an animal on Snapchat. So you'll be able to collect some really amazing, great metric data. And also, MySpace might be pretty useful in the future. And I'm still all over that.
I'm not sure what your space looks like or what Snapchat is all about, but I can tell you that we probably need something a little bit more collaborative as an approach. Never mind the fact that whatever you've been doing now, you're telling me was useless in the first place. You're not going to be doing that in the next while. We got a problem.
Right. So, as has been brought up multiple times during the day, campus buy-in is huge. So if I'm doing it on my own, that is not long-term sustainable. The more people that are involved and invested, the more likely it's going to be successful. Working as a team gets different perspectives in and gets different priorities in. Not being solely responsible for the end success. Although you may want to try and position yourself that way in your institution to make yourself indispensable, trust me, it's easier to just cut one person out than to eliminate a whole team.
Never mind that, but then the angle of this will pay off in 15 years from now when these grads are in a position where they are financially able to make larger gifts to the institution, which in a lot of cases is what your senior administration is focused on. So in those situations, as a senior administrator, I might say, okay, that's great. It's going to pay back in 15 years. I'll be long retired. I'll be on the golf course or on a cruise ship somewhere. I don't care what happens then. I don't necessarily want to invest in this today because I don't see the value in worrying about what the place is going to look like in 15 years from now. Now, I hope that nobody works for people at institutions where that's the thought process, but you just never know. So keep that in mind when you're presenting anything about what's the reality of when this will pay off and how. How can you measure that? Because in alumni relations, it's the toughest place to measure anything we do, right?
Another tip is if you can get access to the university's strategic plan or engagement plan, either borrow language or see how this plan can fit into that, it's going to make it so much easier for people to say yes and to support your ideas moving forward. Any questions on sustainability, how not to? Great, moving right along. Okay, so Ben, I see you're on the way to a meeting. Can I walk with you and chat about something?
Sure, you got 3 minutes.
Terrific. I've connected with all of our campus partners who work with young alumni, and we're meeting throughout the upcoming year to discuss what each of us are doing, what we would like to be doing with this group, and we'll also be discussing successes, improvement projects, and how to leverage current events and portfolios to speak to our young grads specifically. I'll be facilitating these discussions and compiling an ongoing report to be submitted for your approval at the end of 6 months.
Well, I love that you've taken a leadership role in this and that you're keeping me in the loop, but what is it that you're going to need from me?
Right. So again, I think that at this point, we can really ask for what we need. And from my perspective and my experience, what we actually need through this process is for leadership to trickle down that this is happening, this is important, and it will be important for the university moving forward.
So if that hasn't been brought forward by the senior administration in the first place, creating some things from, the grassroots level is always tougher to sell. But if you try to get them on board by tapping into ideas that you've heard or seen in the documents that talk about the bigger picture of the institution, are likely to get buy-in, and then you can have them, senior administrators, share that story across different departments around the university.
So keeping your leadership informed as to what's going on, leveraging the network of university decision makers, celebrating success of what's currently happening on campus, really talking and getting excited about what plans are that are happening at the faculty level or with different groups on campus, building out your colleagues, and collection and reporting of the outcome data is also really important as well. There's a lot of really great stuff that you can do with your own grads. You can relate to national averages. One of the key components that made our leadership sit up and take notice was our young alumni are actually giving at the national average, which is terrific to know. We wouldn't have known if we didn't figure out who those people were and do some research as to what the young alumni giving national averages are. So really knowing what the picture looks like at your school and have ideas ready to suggest for some tinkering or improvements from your leadership.
In the reality, there's a lot of people who are in senior administrative roles that don't want to be the experts on every single component of advancement, and they will look for that expertise to come from their team members. The important part is presenting it in a way that doesn't make them feel like they're completely disconnected with it, and doesn't necessarily make you the expert on all components, but certainly a great resource. And they'll often then turn around and say, great, I can think that little Ben is the guy to talk to about millennials and about young alumni engagement further.
Terrific. So that kind of brings us to the end of our hilarious pantomime. So now I think that we have the opportunity to turn it over to a real life leader in the field and open it up for questions, guidance, perspectives straight from the mouth of an advancement professional giant. Literally, this guy is a mountain of a human being.
I used to be little.
It all depends on who you surround yourself with.
To put things in more of a real context, my day-to-day is taking ideas that the team has and trying to question them and ensure that we've looked at all the angles before we bring them anywhere else. To try to protect the team in a way and to ensure that we have the best angle to sell it to whomever we're going to present this with. So I'm a middle manager. That's what you do. You take information from here and you try to sell it up the food chain. And that's kind of, if you have any ideas or questions about how a good way to go about doing that, I'm happy to answer those questions. If you don't have any thoughts. Give you lots of ideas or scenarios. We had that this week. Somebody came in on my team and said, I have this, I've been thinking. Okay, what does that mean? I have this idea. Okay, it's about a stewardship video. Okay, and then we got into the details of what it was. Quite a colorful conversation. But we tweaked it before we went anywhere else with it. So how do you go about doing that so that you're not shut down right away? Obviously, you have to know who you're talking with. But don't be taken aback by questions that may come your way when you present that idea initially. Yes?
Do you want an idea that we have really fleshed out a bit and all the angles discovered or kind of covered and then bring that to you? Or are you open to, what about thinking about something like this and then bringing everybody from our team together to kind of brainstorm it?
I think both are.
Do you want some research done?
There's two approaches. I think there's two separate approaches. Depending on the day, I might like one approach versus the other. It depends on the project, and depending on that's true. And depending on who else might be involved in it in the long run. I don't want people to waste their time. So if you've gone so far down one road in detail and looked at all the angles and you present it, it might be shut down too quickly because it's gone so far down that road. Versus, here's an idea. What do you think of this? Okay, I don't mind it. It's not horrible. Let's look at it further, and then all of a sudden you can now take that road together rather than go too far down one path on your own and having to spend a lot of time and energy researching things that may not be relevant in the conversation. But you should be prepared to answer some questions for sure at any stage along the way.
I think one of the challenges working in higher ed is often time. It's not like we're working in startups where you can have an idea and it gets fleshed out and implemented the next day. So one of the questions maybe I'd have for you, if you could share with the group, when ideas are brought forward, how many people often have to have a say in it? And I think often we see 6 months as a realistic timeline to get something done in higher ed. And that can be frustrating, but also there's a lot of just reality and red tape you have to go through working for higher ed institutions. So maybe you can just share with us a little bit about how that process kind of gets fleshed out.
I think if there's one thing I've learned in 14 years of working in higher education is patience. It's hard. The great idea that you come up with and the intended goal that you have with it will change over the 6 months that the idea will take to become a reality. realistically, we are in positions where there are often more potential risks that need to be looked at before we do something that we send out to the large audiences. We talked briefly with Aaron about convocation video that went back and forth between the president's office and their team for months because of the content, because of some angles of terminology used in it, or whatever it may have been. That's one thing that, as people move to more senior roles within a university, I believe they get more and more worried about the potential risks that are out there when you start broadcasting or doing something that will reach the masses. I mean, our institutions do a lot of good things, but it's very easy for critics and some of our own cynical grads to turn quickly if we do something that's a little bit too outside of the norm. Now, I'm not saying to not take risks, because we do try all kinds of things, and it's one thing that we have fun with. But there are times when testing certain things to a small audience is okay, and taking certain risks won't be a big issue if it flops. But there are other instances, the higher up it gets, where more people will be involved, and it will slow down the process to get to the end goal. Only because it could impact the reputation of the university, which is what everybody's worried about. But having the patience to say, I have this idea, and it's going to take weeks, months, sometimes over a year to get to where we want it to be, is sometimes difficult and discouraging. But if that's not the environment where you're happy and that you want to continue building on, then maybe that's a realization that working in higher ed might not be the perfect place for you, right? Which is also a very important realization that everyone has to make. And on that lovely note. I like to look at taking the time to do it right, rather than to do it quickly and having to, send out a bunch of, oh, I'm sorry we did that, so I'm sorry we did that.
Awesome.
Makes sense. Anything else? Perfect. Awesome. Thank you.